to this very important event. We chose tonight because we had the opportunity to have Rabbi Lew with us, which is a very, I would say, a very good schus. And it's Erev Hey Teves, which is the focus of every chassid. Hey Teves, a day which we know was tremendously important to Rebbe and to Chabad and to Chassidus. And the Simcha of Hey Teves it's hard to describe for Chassidim then. And Vayama Hey Mizman Hazeh, how much greater that was there. We realized today the importance of what Hey Teves means to us Chassidim and the battle the Rebbe was fighting for the entire Chabad Chassidus, the Rebbe, the Nasi, and our discussion to the Rebbe. It was a very, very important event, and it's really special to have Rabbi Lew here with us. But even what makes it even more relevant this year, we know in the first Hey Teves, the Rebbe connected it with Yud Shvat, and for those who remember, at that time, the Rebbe gave many tests. You should test by Mashpiyim, by teachers, 3 tests before Yud Shvat, and tied the whole Hey Teves to Yud Shvat. We're now coming to a very important time, and it's Shnas HaShivim of the Nesius of the Rebbe Yud Shvat. It's the Shnas HaShivim of every chassid. It's an exciting time, even though we obviously want to see the Rebbe here with us Lamata and with Mashiach together. As we prepare ourselves for this Ma'ira, this Kufre is exciting to see the Nesius and what the Rebbe every single day accomplishes internationally, worldwide, and by each and every one chassid and the difference it makes in our lives. So it's something special. To introduce this program, we couldn't think of a better person. Rabbi Lew is known as, obviously, he's the most famous known shluchim internationally, the principal in London of the high school, noted shliach or lecturer around campuses, and has been all over the world many times. But I think what's relevant to today, the piece which I think is relevant, I say this without a doubt, there are very few people who can speak so clearly and have lived with the Rebbe's Nesius and all the Yud Shvats from the Chafs. And as we Chassidim, we're sitting now at a time and want to know how to prepare ourselves, we have to hear what was the life of Yud Shvat, how the Rebbe told us Yud Shvat, how Chassidim prepared, and the connection. So it's a great privilege to have with us Rabbi Lew. It's not an easy schedule. I want to also wish him Mazel Tov. He also has some simchas here, of Einiklach here, we have Yarech Brachas and Echas Shalom Teves, him with his wife and the whole mishpacha, and should come only for simple good reasons. Rabbi Lew is not new in Chicago. He's not new to anybody in Lubavitch, many of his, but it's really a privilege to give us the perspective of how to really prepare ourselves for Yud Shvat and the civilized day of Hey Teves. Thank you very much. I do want to say, at the end there'll be an announcement of a mifsa internationally around the world, but I will announce in the end, in between the speech of the Farbrengen. Please stay on for that. There'll be my rules afterwards.
Okay, first of all, Shalom Aleichem, Chicago. It's very good to be back here. I have very good memories, and thank God your excellent chinuch system here. I have a number of grandchildren, grandsons, granddaughters here or graduated from here. So a big yasher koyach to Chicago. I'm going to tell you a story which happened in 1951. Tafshin Yud Aleph. It happened with 2 Chassidim. They were Baba Chassidim. And they were walking down Eastern Parkway. One of them was from Crown Heights. Their community was pretty small then. All the communities were pretty small then. But based in Crown Heights. And one was from out of town. The man from out of town was walking with his local friend, and they saw this young, holy-looking person coming down the street. And the man from out of town said, that Yid, there's an oil, there's something special. You can see right away in his face. So his local friend says, you know who that is? That's the new Lubavitcher Rebbe. He says, wow, I'm going to go give him shalom. And his friend holds him by the arm. He says, don't go give him shalom. What do you mean? Why should I go give him shalom? And he breaks away from his friend. He wasn't holding him that tight. And he walks over to the Rebbe and he says, Shalom Aleichem. And the Rebbe says, Aleichem Shalom. Where are you from? He says, I'm from Cleveland. The Rebbe says, Cleveland? You know, they started building a mikveh there 3 years ago, and somehow or another, they didn't get around to finishing it. And you should get involved and do something about it. So he said, I'm a Pashas Yid. I'm just a member of the community there, What can I do? So the Rebbe says, I'm here in New York. I'm telling you what's happening in Cleveland. There's something that has to be done, and you have to get involved in doing it. He went back to his friend, and he says, I regret giving him shalom. And his friend said, that's why I warned you, he says. This is in Tafshin Yud Aleph, he says, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is known that any encounter he has with someone, he wants something from them. Whenever you're going to meet him, he's going to demand something. That's the story I want to tell you. And you talk about Hey Teves and Yud Shvat. I want to speak about some real happy memories of those days. But I purposely started with that story because it gives us a perspective in how to look at success. I was at Yud Shvat, Tafshin Tes Zayin, by the way. In 1960, Tafshin Chof was not my first Yud Shvat by the Rebbe. It was 1956, when I was just almost 16 years old. And Yud Shvat was a Yom Tiv, was a special day, a Yortzeit, a Hilula. As time went by, if you look carefully, you can look at the Sichos of the Rebbe. Yud Shvat is a time where the Rebbe would give a mission statement. It's a time of Cheshbon HaNefesh, a time of considering what we have achieved, where are we, and what's on the agenda now. You look at all the sichos, and the first Yud Shvat, everyone knows, Yud Shvat Tafshin Yud Aleph, the Rebbe said the famous Maimah, in which he laid out, and the Farbrengen, the sichos, he laid out what the task of our generation to bring Mashiach, and how to do it, to go out, and to be Makarev people, and to bring them closer, and not just to tell them about Hashem, but to inspire them, and to compel them with compelling arguments that they themselves should be calling out in the name of Hashem. And as the years go by, we see it happening and growing exponentially. If you look at the Sichos, Yud Shvat, but especially the days following, specifically the Shabbosim, the Shabbos after Yud Shvat, Chamisha Osa B'Shvat, B'Shalach, these times, the Rebbe was invariably speaking about where we're holding at this moment. In Tafshin Chof, with the 10th anniversary, the Rebbe said, we now finished 10 Koiches HaNefesh, we have to go beyond. I remember personally being there I was there from Tezayin most years until Tafshin Nun. Numalef. And the Rebbe said in Chav Gimel, he said it's 13 years, the Shabbos after, was B'Shalach, it's 13 years. So Shein Tzait Nase Godol, it's time that we should become like a mature person. 13 years old is Bar Mitzvah. So the Rebbe was talking about how we should look upon ourselves, on the generation, and the role that we can play in our own microcosm, in our own personal world, and in the world around us, how we can make a difference to people. And it's happened, and it's happening. Everybody could do more and should do more as a hachana, and to think about it. But we should first of all recognize what has happened and what is happening, and we see it in front of our eyes. I remember Yud Shvat Tavshin Chof. I was a bacha studying in the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Montreal, and there was a tremendous air of anticipation. And the Rebbe gave out a special letter. It was a brief but powerful letter, maybe 10 lines. It's published now in the Maimorim, which they just gave out this year. I remember Tavshin Lamed. I'm going to go through some of the milestone decade years. I remember Tavshin Lamed, 5730-1970, which to this day in Lubavitch, if you tell somebody, if you remember this about Yud Shvat HaGodol, the big Yud Shvat, that everyone knows it means Tavshin Lamed. They concluded Mashiach Sefer Torah was a major milestone towards bringing Mashiach. The Rebbe became much more publicly involved. The Rebbe was always reaching out and working very hard for all of Klal Yisrael. You look at the Rebbe's letters in 1951, he was in touch with about 20 different countries, telling people, and there were no shluchim, there was no money, there was no nothing. And the Rebbe was making changes in all those places. But in Tavshin Lamed was the first time that there was a live broadcast of a Farbrengen of the Rebbe. That started, until then you couldn't get a tape even. And here you had a live broadcast of the Rebbe. In London, our first was Purim. But Yud Shvat was the date when it was broadcast to Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe became a lot more publicly involved in the question of the shtochim, the territories in Eretz Yisrael, not to relinquish what belongs to us. And a few weeks later, the whole question of Mihu Yehudi, Flamus Ha'am, became very public, very assertive position of the Rebbe. I heard, just on a personal level, I was in London already on Shlichus, there was a man there by the name of Dayan Grunfeld. Dayan Grunfeld wrote books. You can see his books, various books he wrote in English at a time when there was very little published in English. And I had a connection with him about certain personal things that he used to speak to me about. And when the Rebbe came out about Mihu Yehudi, he told me, it was a phone call, he said, you know, this is the end of Lubavitch being able to reach out to the world. He said the Rebbe he had a tremendous Hadras Kavod, a tremendous respect for the Rebbe. And he had himself put out a little booklet about Mihu Yehudi, and he gave me a signed copy of it at that time. And he said the Lubavitcher Rebbe has the right to decide, to sacrifice the 20 years of work that he did in impacting Klal Yisrael, because he did it. He created it, and he has now decided that the priority is to argue for this. What he didn't realize at the time that was only the beginning, and everything in Chabad grew from that. But it's not a chiddush to be able to recognize the leadership of the Rebbe, the foresight, the vision, the way the Rebbe saw this is what has to be done. Following Torah's emes because it's emes will not turn people away. On the contrary, it drew more people closer, and it became really a point of attraction for people to get more involved. That was Tafshin Lamed. Tafshin Mem, the Rebbe spoke about, it's 1980, the Rebbe spoke about it being 40 years, for perhaps a whole year. And I am Leroy's. Now God has given you the eyes to see and the appreciation after 40 years. The Rebbe spoke very strongly in the whole year, not just around Yud Shvat. And there was a Farbrengen, which was very, very well attended, even by the proportions of those days. Many people, and the President of the United States sent somebody with a special greeting. There were all kinds of great leaders and Jewish and non-Jewish who came to give brachos to the Rebbe, and also Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi JBCproductionsLLC, who lived in Boston at that time, the head of Yeshiva University, and was the leader of all the modern Orthodox rabbis in America. He came to that Farbrengen, and he was given a special place sitting near the Rebbe, at the table of the Rebbe. I heard he was supposed to come for 1 hour, and he stayed for about 3 hours. And then he got up to leave. And when he got up, the Rebbe stood up and spoke with him. They had a conversation for at least 5 minutes. Maybe, to me, it seemed like 10 minutes, and that means thousands and thousands of people all stood up. When the Rebbe stood up, everyone stood. Until the Rebbe sat down, everyone was standing. And the Rebbe had a private conversation with this person. Different people gave different interpretations, why, what. He knew him as young people, but there were representatives of the President of the United States. The Rebbe didn't get up for them. They came over to the Rebbe's place, they said l'chaim, they gave what they had to give, the Rebbe said a few words to them. All the different representatives of different groups and different leaders. Now I heard that the Rebbe said to Rabbi Krinsky that he would like to know what Rabbi Soloveitchik's impression was of the Farbrengen. And at the next visit of Rabbi Krinsky to Boston, he's a native Bostonian, when he went there, he went to see Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he spoke to him about his coming to the Farbrengen, and he just said, what did it say to you? And he said, it helped me to understand a Gemara, which puzzled me all these decades, and this is the first time I understand what the Gemara said. What's the Gemara? The Gemara says, when it talks about Simchas Beis HaShoeva, that there was the joy of the drawing of the waters. But the Gemara also says that it was the time, it was a place, and it was an occasion, Shemisham Shoyavim Ruach HaKodesh. That wasn't only the drawing of waters, it was the opportunity to draw Ruach HaKodesh. And then the Gemara says a fantastic thing. It was a Navi, one of the Nevi'im, Yoina HaNavi, Yoina ben Amitai, who we read his whole story on Yom Kippur, near the climax of Yom Kippur, at Mincha. And Yoina ben Amitai, the Gemara says, he became a Navi. He drew his Nevuah, his Koyach HaNevuah, from Simchas Beis HaShoeva. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said, I'm wondering all these decades, how can you get nevuah from being somewhere? You know, the Rambam enumerates all the stages and what it means, the level of nevuah, what it means to a person to be misnabe as a verb, that he's reaching, just like someone is studying, so somebody is reaching to it, nevuah. How can you go and get nevuah? How can you get prophecy from just being in a certain place? And he said, when I was at that Farbrengen, it all made sense. I felt, should I talk louder? Okay. He says, I felt there was Ruach HaKodesh. And just the atmosphere itself created that feeling. By the way, let me digress a minute. In our personal lives and in our homes and in our families, the importance of atmosphere. The importance and the power to create it, just besides doing all the right things and, of course, refraining from all the things that shouldn't be done, the power of creating an atmosphere. When the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, was in prison, and they didn't know where he was for months. The police didn't report to the family, to his wife, to the Rebbe and Chana. Eventually, what happened is a few months later, somebody was freed, and Rabbi Yitzchak asked him to just inform his wife that he's alive and he's there and what was happening, which he did. But Rabbi Levi also said to him, tell my wife that even though there's such a great pressure and such great apprehension and such great anxiety, she should see that the atmosphere of Yutes Kislev should be there in the home. There should be candles lit on Yutes Kislev. That was the children were out of the house. The power of atmosphere is just an important thing. But that was Tafshin Mem. On a personal level, I flew in from London that day on Yud Shvat, and I got to Crown Heights about 5 o'clock. I just grabbed a place at the Farbrengen, and I stayed there, from about 5 in the afternoon for the next 10 hours or whatever. And the next day, before I went to the airport, I was just here for 24 hours. I had the privilege to have a visit with my father-in-law, Zalman Jaffe, at the Rebbe's in Chayamushka, who spoke very beautiful things, about different things about England. Tafshin Nun was 40 years, and the Rebbe gave out a special tanya to everybody. Close to 13,000 tanyas were distributed that night after the Sikha. The Rebbe said a Sikha and gave everyone present a tanya, a sefer, and spoke very strongly about the 40 years. So I say 40 years from the Tafshin Mem. If I did, it was a mistake. That was 30 years. This is 40 years, and the Rebbe spoke the whole year about Aboyim Shana. Tafshin Samach was after Gimel Tammuz. And now I'm telling you a personal thing. I went in. I spoke in a different country, Shabbos before. On Yud Shvat I arrived. It was freezing cold. I went to the oil. It was packed. And on the plane, I was somehow or another, the underground subway. I was in school that day, so I couldn't leave too early. I had to be around in the morning. And the train broke down, so I got to the airport very late. They had already given my seat to someone else. had a change, and I sat next to somebody. Rahman al-Islam, it was a woman who had taken very, very unfortunate steps as a girl, as a youngster. Rahman al-Islam, didn't want to say it in a shul. And we got to talking, and we exchanged contact details. She was from Stamford, Connecticut. Then I got to the oil, and I met a neshama, and it's an American actually, a big rough today, but he was Baal Tshuva, he studied in London, and I had a connection with him years ago. And he introduced me to his cousin, who actually was a girl studying in Lubavitch school, maybe we even here, but she had been to the seminary, and now she was on shlichus, and he introduced her to me. And I said, where are you on shlichus? She says, Stamford, Connecticut. I said, really? I told her the whole story about the woman, and I gave her the contact details. I said, please look after that woman, and please inform me all the time. And this girl made it her business to go midday shavua b'shavua. Every week, she baked a challah. He took a home-baked challah to this lady on Friday. He spoke with her. I know she was at a Seder Pesach. Whatever. My story here is not about that woman and the contact with her, which went on for a couple of years. It was the girl who sent me an email, and she said, look, I went on shlichus to Stanford, and I was happy with things that happened, but I was getting bored, or maybe felt lonely, away from friends. These girls, they go places, and whatever you give them, it's not always compensating for the things that they're lacking, being away from their friendly, familiar places. And she said, I felt that I'm not really achieving, it's not where I'm supposed to be. And I went to the Oyo that day, Yud Shvat Tovshin Samach, and I asked the Rebbe, I'm in Stanford, I don't really know if I should stay here. Please give me a sign. And she walked out, and 15 minutes later, she met her cousin, he introduced her to me, and she found out that she had a job there. That's Tovshin Samach. Tovshin Ayin. It's also in New York, also an interesting thing, but you'll leave it for a different time. Maybe the Farbrengen, what happened Tovshin Ayin. Tovshin Pei, Im Yetz Hashem Mashiach will be here before Hey Teves, let alone Yud Shvat. But it's up to us to think about what the Rebbe would want from us. And you don't have to be a big chassid and a big genius and a big intellectual and a big historian to be able to work out what would the Rebbe be asking us to do. The story about the Baba v'Chasidim is enough. And that is Yud Shvat, and we're coming up, it's after the Zman of my Rabbi Hertz, so it's already Erev, Hey Teves already, it's an Erev Yom Tov. And Hey Teves was a time which the Rebbe personally showed us exactly how this is the Yutes Kislev of this generation. It represents the Nitzchias, the eternity of the Nesias. It relates to our situation today, specifically after Gimel Tammuz. It's a time when people said that Lubavitch is finished, is not pa'il. The Rebbe used that word many times. That's Hebrew, not active. And the Rebbe said, of course we're active, very active. But we're going to take it as a sign to do even more. And that's happening till today. So the Tzad HaShoveh, the common denominator between Hey Teves and Yud Shvat is you can have a perspective and see it as success stories of this generation. Building, exponential growth. Lubavitch 70 years ago, what was Lubavitch? From a Chetzoniistic point of view, we know what it was. Everyone today knows what it was. But at that time, how did people look at it? A small group, refugees, ran away from Stalinist Russia, right after the Holocaust. Very few people, very little money, very little connections. The Rebbe was saying we're going to take over the world. When the Rebbe came to America in 1941, he said that at a Farbrengen. On the Shabbos Farbrengen, he said, we start off with little things like Mesiva Shabbos, and we're going to take over the world. And the older I heard this from older Hasidim that were there, and they said the older ones, older than them, said, this man is a little bit delusional. This is in the middle of the Holocaust, 1942. The Rebbe was saying, this is what we're going to do. But he had the vision and the plan and the action. But what was it then? Lubavitch was an interesting curiosity. He went to speak when I was a bacher. So in Montreal, Tov, the first time I went with Rabbi Mangel, Rabbi Nissim Mangel, we were both, he was older than me, but bacherim there. And then here in New York, I went to many campuses and many groups. So we went, it was a certain, an interesting phenomenon. The Hasidim are here. And people came, maybe slightly inspired, but we were outsiders. It was non-conventional. It was interesting. It was exotic. But it was not something, and there was no such thing as a Chabad on campus, for example. We went to Hillel, or to whatever group was at that campus. Today, a Chabad is considered mainstream. Considered mainstream. What does it mean, mainstream? There's still plenty of areas where we have to, get our act together. But every group, every single group that calls itself Jewish, and many groups that are not even Jewish, have adopted certain practices from Chabad. Not charging for services, I don't know, whatever it is. Everyone looks, it's a large thing. So there's a temptation to sit back and say, wow, look what we've done, look what we've achieved. But we have to resist that temptation. We have to ask, what's next? That's the question. What can I do now? I have a chava, the first person who ever invited me as a 15-year-old to come to a Tanya Shir, when I was in Camp Aguda in 1955. His name is Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Gurari, Meir Gurari. We met there in Camp Aguda, and we used to talk. I didn't know anything really about Lubavitch, and we used to have these little verbal duels about Lubavitch, snag this, whatever. And one day he says to me, would you like to come to a Tanya Shir here in camp, given by Rabbi Baruch? And it sounded so wild to me that I said yes. And so I was in Montreal with him. Later I wound up in Montreal for 4 years. And he was a brilliant bacher. Knew a tremendous amount of Chassidus. Very Chassidish anhaga, very smart with it. And whenever he went into Yechidus with the Rebbe was always giving him jobs to do. And at some stage, he felt that maybe the Rebbe is not happy. Thank you. And maybe the Rebbe is not happy. What? And he went into Yechidus and he said to the Rebbe, he said, I get the impression that the Rebbe is not happy with what I'm doing. So the Rebbe told him, this is how I remember it. I've heard it since from him or from his children, but I'm telling you how I remember it from 60 years ago when he was a bacher and told it to me. The Rebbe said, Ich hab a teva. I have a certain nature. Was ich will nicht beiken. It's a nature which I don't want to change. Generally, Chassidus is changing your nature. This is a nature I don't want to change. Namely, I'm happy with every single thing that you do. Aber ich will noch, but I want more. That's my nature. I'm happy with everything, but not satisfied with anything. That's called unlimited goal. You might be able to define Geula as an unlimited goal. A person has a goal in life. I want to train. I want to become a doctor. I want to become a teacher. I want to become a trader. Whatever it is. And you work, you study, which subject you have to go into. And then you get there, you're there. You're in the position that you were aiming for, that you were dreaming about. You reach your goal. The Rebbe is teaching us that you haven't reached the goal as long as there's a corner in the world where there's not a Gilui Elokus. When Mashiach will come, that will be the goal, and I assure you that will be something then as well. But it'll be in a different time. That's what I believe. So what we have to do is to appreciate the hachana, the Yud Shvat, the preparation, especially it's a special year. It's the 70th year. That hachana should be, number one, I was in Montreal for 4 years, as I mentioned. And in Montreal, we were allowed to come into New York 4 times a year. The whole yeshiva came in, sometimes with a bus. Sometimes we hired a carriage, a car of the train. The whole yeshiva came in, Yud Shvat, Pesach, Yud Beis Tammuz, and Tishrei. And my birthday is in Oder, so I will have my yechidus those 4 years, Yud Shvat time. And I asked the Rebbe various things. I'm going to share with you one thing. One year, it was Tavshin Chaf Aleph, 1961. It was a month before my 21st birthday. I asked the Rebbe for an eitzah, how to be mekusher, how to have his kashrus, how to be attached to the Rebbe. And the night before, the big Farbrengen, this was a Sunday night, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning when I went in. But the big Farbrengen for Yud Shvat was Friday, and Motzi Shabbos was the big Farbrengen, and there the Rebbe said a major sikha about a chosid feeling a desire to have his kashrus to his Rebbe. A chosid wants to be attached to his Rebbe. So the Rebbe said what people don't realize is that they have a desire to have an attachment, but that desire is not the product of their own effort. It's because the Rebbe is thinking about them. And with the Rebbe's power of thought, he's drawing them to be interested in being closer and having a connection to the Rebbe. And he quotes a sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe, from the previous Rebbe. It's in Hayom Yom, I believe it's Yud Dalet Shvat, that the Rebbeim would think about the Hasidim in a loving way. And that's where it's coming from. So everybody says, why is it relevant? Because it says in Chassidus, if something comes from above, there's an inspiration that comes from outside of yourself. It comes from Lamaila, from heaven. It has the advantage of being powerful, infinite. It's coming from the Ein Sof, so it's infinite. But it also has the disadvantage that it can disappear. It can just evaporate. Whereas something which you worked on is maybe smaller, but it's internalized, it's me, it becomes me. So here, you have this feeling for Hiskashus. This is the Rebbe saying in the Sikha. You can check it. Motzi Shabbos, Tavshin Chaf Aleph. What happens is, it says in this is explained in Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe. And what the Alter Rebbe says, what should you do if you suddenly get inspired? And it's not because you really worked on yourself so much that's where you really belong. It just, that came to you. That's a gift to you from outside of yourself. What you should do, now the Rebbe says, is connect it to Ma'aseh B'Poyel. Do something about it. And that will draw it down, it will anchor it, and make it something which is active and effective in your life. So the Rebbe said the same way with this Kashus, you should connect it to Ma'aseh B'Poyel. That inspiration, that feeling that you want to have. So for me, that was, the Rebbe was giving me exactly what I should ask him the next night in Yechidus. And that's what I wrote to the Rebbe. I really want to have his Kashus to you. And I have my weak moments, and my moments of doubt, and my moments of where maybe that's not at the forefront of my mind. But I want it to be. And therefore, I'm asking the Rebbe, everything in Yechidus was written. You ask your questions written. I'm asking the Rebbe, Eich lahaviyah lepoyel ka'atzas k'void kedushas adma shlita b'sichas ha'as v'adas. How can I bring it into practice, like the Rebbe's advice in the Sikha of the Farbrengen? And it was a list of about 4 or 5 things which I asked the Rebbe, and I was just praying that the Rebbe would relate to it in a way that I would understand, and I would see him answering it. And thank God, the Rebbe said, of course, the Rebbe would look at the settle like this, he would scroll a settle in Yechidus. It was a very formal occasion, especially as a bracha. The Rebbe was bent down. I remember Yechidusim where you had eye contact at the beginning, eye contact at the end, but in the middle, all I saw was the Rebbe's hat, because his head was bent down, he was looking at the settle. Honestly, he said, das was the Shreit, whatever he wrote. He said, that which you write about his kashrus, the Ike his kashrus is durch Torah. The main his kashrus is through Torah, as it says in Hayom Yom. That includes chitas. And you learn what I learned. You will have a bond, as it says in Tanya, by the way, in Perik Hey, that's a bond which is unmatched in anything in the physical world. That's basically what the Rebbe, and then the Rebbe said, Ulechol Rosh, Hitin Sidrei HaYeshiva, first and foremost, keep the times, as a bacha in the yeshiva, keep the times of the lessons in the yeshiva to the extent that it will impact others in a positive way. That they will themselves learn from you to do it. These are the words. I was worried because the Rebbe told me, learn what he learns. But how do I know what the Rebbe learned? So the Rebbe answered all the points, but this is mugad. I have this Yechidus. I came out in a chura of one of my daughter's weddings. And when the Rebbe finished and said the bracha and everything else, I figured I got to say it now. It's now or never. And I somehow plucked up the courage. And I said the following, I'll tell you the words in Yiddish. These are the exact words and this exact tone that I said it. I'm just a boy there, standing like a soldier in Yiddish. But I said, the Rebbe gesagt is to learn what the Rebbe learned. That's all I said. The Rebbe said I should learn what the Rebbe learns. I didn't end the sentence. It was obviously what I'm asking. And here the Rebbe looked at me, through me, and said, Ich lern Nigla und Chasidus. I learned revealed part and the Hasidic part of Torah. And then they gave an explanation. He quoted Likutei Torah by Midbar. By the way, it's Daf Yud Gimel. The Rebbe said, it says in Likutei Torah, the difference between Torah and mitzvahs is that each mitzvah is compared to and connects to a different limb of the body. But the Torah is called Zois HaTorah Odom. Odom is Aleph Dam, it's blood. The bloodstream circulates throughout the body, the same thing. At the Farbrengen later we could maybe go into that whole thing, my own discoveries and musings on that idea, learning anything, and you become Iskashis to the Rebbe. We know today, Chitas Rambam, there are hundreds and hundreds of Sfarim of the Rebbe's Torah, presented in a way that satisfies the needs or the desires of every single one of us, man, woman, or child. In different languages, in different media, different ways to access it. There's no problem today to access everything of the Rebbe's Torah. It just needs A, really a desire, and B, consistency. Be a little bit masuda. Go in order, not just random, to go in and take it. I'll tell you different yichidus I had. This was in 1966, Tavshin Chav Zayin, Yutes Kislev's time. I was in England already for a year. Usually you waited for 2 years. My brother, my youngest brother, was getting married. And my father, Olav Shalom, wanted me to come in. And I asked the Rebbe, and Rebbe, if your father wants to come in, I came in. And I was in Yechidus with my wife. The night before, just after Yutes Kislev. We came in for Yutes Kislev. It was the night before my brother's wedding. And the Rebbe said to me, the brother who's getting married, is that the brother that you used to learn Chassidus with him? And it took me maybe a couple of seconds to realize that I actually once learned with my brother. 5 years before, we used to learn every Thursday night, which happened about maybe 10 times over the year. But, it was always a reason. He was away, I was away, whatever it was. And I had completely forgotten it. And the Rebbe says, is that the brother? I said, yes. So the Rebbe said, Eled Machals Chassidus. Is he still learning Chassidus? So I said to the Rebbe, I don't know what I should have said. I still can't work out what I should have said, but I think maybe I said, Ich weiß nicht, I don't know. And then he gave a big smile and he said, Did you listen to Shirad Lashon Hara and Brunnen? You don't want to say something against your brother? He said, how am I going to say? I say no. I say yes. I was in England. Anyway, the Rebbe said, tell him in my name. I'm telling you in English. The Rebbe told me in Yiddish. And he mentioned twice and maybe 3 times, the Rebbe repeated, Zogim in my nomen on acharayas. Not your responsibility. It's mine. The Rebbe is giving a message. As over is over. The past is past. Don't get into the trap of regretting the past, of living in the past, of wallowing in all these mistakes that you made. The Rebbe said, tell him that it's available today in Hebrew, in Yiddish, or English, whichever language is better for him, but he has to learn Chassidus. Ova is Ova. So the first thing for his kashrus is to rededicate ourselves to the Rebbe's Torah. And if possible, and if applicable, if one doesn't have a good shiur according to his own or her own ability, to start it now, before Hey Teves Tavshin Pei. In the Rebbe's Torah, but it should be straight. Something you can do it 15 minutes at night or in the morning. A certain time, certain sefer, do it several times. Learn the same, maybe Chassidish heritage series or something you get online. How to do it, everyone knows. the different ways they can do it. But choose a way and go with it. See, try it for a year, try it for a month, try it till Yud Shvat, or till Yud Aleph Nisan, something. And if you're ready doing it, take on something additional, small addition, at least from now until Yud Shvat. The Ikar, his kashrus, is durch Torah. That way, your mind, your attitude, is shaped by your connection to the Rebbe. A second thing, hachana, and something to do. And I base this on, I'll tell you a couple of stories, but if you want to do a favor to the Rebbe said to someone, he asked someone for a person, he used the words personal favor, and the person did it. It was worrying about the prisoners in South Africa, the Jewish prisoners. And the Rebbe told him, what can I do for you now as a personal favor? And he said, I have all the brachas, I have nachas for my children. You're giving me everything. And the Rebbe said, I have a principle. Ich bleib nicht kein Balchoy. I will not remain in debt. All the brachas I give everyone. But you did me a personal favor. I tell that story in my school to the girls. I say, if you want to do a personal favor to the Rebbe, the way to do it is by seeking out a fellow Jew. That was worried about the people there. You help me on that, that's a personal favor. That's a hachama. To think it's miftzoyim, a way. And a third way, I give you 3 pillars, shloisha amudim. Get yourself a mashpia. That's the hard one. That's the tough one. But it's necessary. It's necessary. It's hard because we don't want to be vulnerable and we don't know who we can trust. And we're afraid that they'll be judgmental. And every single person that I know of who went and did it, appointed for themselves a mashpia, felt empowered, they felt released, they felt geula from just being able to talk to the other person. Just a contact with the person. So those are the 3 things I want to tell you. Now I want to tell you a story about Shnas Hashiva. In England, there was a chassid, a Jew by the name of Rabbi Aaron Dov Safran. Olav Shalom. And Rabbi Sudak Olav Shalom came to England, and he created a hanhola of 3 people, himself, Rabbi Vogel Shlita, and Rabbi Safran Olav Shalom. And Rabbi Safran was the head of education, and he helped to establish the schools, the after school, the cheder, Talmud Torah, the camps, the day camps, anything that had to do with formal or informal education. He was there at the beginning. And he was a very sincere person, a very emesdike person. And he went to the Rebbe in Tovshin Lamed Beis, 1972. His birthday is Chof Beis Iyar. And he became 42 years old, that Chof Beis Iyar. And he went for Shavuos just after his 42nd birthday. He went to the Rebbe, and he wrote into the Rebbe that he's totally burnt out. And he doesn't know if he's coming or going. And he basically wanted to withdraw from the responsibilities, I guess. Probably wanted to just be a teacher, mashpia, whatever. He was a very charismatic person. And the Rebbe read his settle. And the Rebbe smiled and he said, I just turned 70. And I took on 71 new moisdes this year. And the Rebbe sat back and smiled and said, I want you to take on 43 projects for this year. That was the Rebbe's answer to burnout. And then he wrote, there was a correspondence back and forth with the Rebbe. He asked the Rebbe, does it have to be moisdes? Could it be individuals, families? And the Rebbe said it could be projects. And he got himself hanging. I remember the file in his office. He got 43 files, and he followed it all up. Each of those people, I'm just telling you something about Seder. When you're doing something, measure it, know it, be able to look at it, and you'll be able to give you encouragement, and it also gives you sometimes a bit of a boost when you're forgetting to do it for a little while. You see it. He had 43 files, and he did his 43 projects. Another story, in a similar vein, there was a young woman, she was from California, I think originally from Chicago even. She lived in California. She became a Baruch Tshuva in the 1970s. She got married. She was on Shlichus here, and then she went to America. Her husband's from England. And they did fantastic work. Unfortunately, she passed away young, but at some stage, she was from a privileged background. And a family of maybe 2 kids, 3 maximum. And so she got married, and the children started coming. Oh, but the second one, she had about 3 kids, maybe 4 already. And she didn't know how to handle it. You know, it came supper time. She couldn't feed the kids because she didn't know what she was doing. So she went by the Rebbe for dollars. And she knows she had just 10 seconds to tell the Rebbe. And she says to the Rebbe, I have a lot of children, I cannot even feed them. The Rebbe smiled, gave her another $1, and he said, you're going to have a lot of children, and you're going to be able to feed them. That was the answer. And she was there with her son, who was about 5 years old, and she asked him, she says, how much is a lot of children? Just right after they went, he said 10, and she actually had 10 kids. Her youngest is in our school now. And Baruch Hashem, and they have impacted maybe thousands of people as a family. A couple of years back. So I heard a story from Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael, ex-Steinsaltz. I once met him in London, and we talked about the Rebbe. And he told me the old famous joke, everyone here knows the old Jewish joke about the man in the shtetl, and he came to the Rav with a problem. The roof is leaking. There's a bunch of kids running around the house. There's no furniture. It's all crowded. It's all pressured. What should I do? And the rabbi says, take the chickens into the house with you. And he comes back 2 days later. He says, worse. Oh, he says, and take the goat into the house. He takes the goat in. It's even much worse, he says to the rabbi. The rabbi says, oh, you know what? Take the cow into the house. And he was mamish impossible. So he went to the rabbi, and he says, I can't do it. So the rabbi says, you know what? Remove the cow and the goats and the chickens. Which he didn't, and he came to the rabbi and said, it's a machaya now. So Rabbi Steinfeld said, the Rebbe is constantly giving us something new to do, but he never takes it out. That's the difference between the famous joke and the Rebbe. He's giving you always something new, so what does he do? The secret is that the Rebbe expands our capacity. People operate at a fraction of their capacity. Yechidah shebenefesh, deep down in the soul. There's a power, and that's the function of a Nossi, of a Rebbe, to bring out that deep element in your neshama, and you suddenly realize that you could do much, much more than you ever thought that you were able to do. The Rebbe gave us a zuchus, tremendous zuchus, that I don't know if there was ever a Jewish leader. Jewish leaders always worried about all ultimate things. The Rebbe enlisted and entrusted and empowered every single one of us to do the work of a Rebbe. Not just to bring the Geula Pratis, not just to do something for yourself, but to do something to the world. It just needs a consciousness. It needs just a desire. That's what our generation is. I want to tell you something, a little confessional. A story with me, it's a really success story, so you say I'm bragging, so say it, but you know, I don't get yeshes from it. I want to tell you when I really blew it in the past year. I went to Wimbledon. Wimbledon is in South London. It takes about an hour and a half to get there from Stamford Hill, where I live. I didn't get I figured I'll take my envelope with all my shiurim. I'll spend an hour doing the shiurim instead of wasting a half hour phoning up everyone who has a lift, a car to take me there. And I went. A beautiful event. It was Yud Dalet Shvat Tovshin Ayin Tes. Then I was going back, and I actually enjoyed being along on the train. So I came back, and I went to the station. It's the last stop, Wimbledon. And there were two trains, and I had to get the train taking me to Victoria Station. It was a Sunday. And I went into one of the trains, and there's an Englishman there, just one person in the whole carriage. And I said to him, "Is this train for Victoria?" He says, "No, it's the one across the platform." I said, "Okay." Just when I'm about to go out, this man says, "Ata madaber yidit?" I said, "Ken." So you did. Anyway, it turned out he's Jewish. And I said, "Have you put on tefillin today?" He said, I said, "Yes." And he said, he didn't put on. I said, "What are you doing here in Wimbledon?" He said he's studying English. There's English language schools there. And as I'm in the middle of the conversation with him, suddenly the whistle blows. It's that the doors are about to close. And I jumped out and I went into the other train. And as those doors closed, I suddenly realized I blew it. I should have either schlepped him out and taken him in the 5-10 minute walk to the Chabad house, or minimum taking his contact details, or minimum giving him my contact details. I didn't do anything. I just ran to get the train. It was a Sunday. Wasn't in a special rush. I felt terrible. I went to Rabbi Dubov, the Shaliach in Wimbledon, and I told him the story. And he said they have a Shaliach there who works with campus, and he works with Israelis who are in the language schools there. And I called up the Shaliach, and I told him he must find. I offered him a donation of £500, that's about $650, if he finds me that guy. I said, "You must find him." And I was in touch with him ad hayom hazeh. The last contact about this was Hoshana Rabbah, like 9 months later. And I don't know if that person would remember. It's an old guy told him, he met new Israelis that he didn't know as a result. But I felt bad. Maybe that person was missing. And I felt bad, and I feel bad about that. Ad hayom hazeh. And I decided I'm going to have to do something to compensate. So in the Sifrei, in the Rambam speaks about the categories for which it's impossible to do tshuva. And he says the reasons why, psychological reasons. Some things because people don't see it as such a bad sin. So or sometimes because they're not with the tzibur, they don't join the community, so they don't become inspired when everybody gets inspired. And some of them is this, some of them. One of them is gezel harabah. If you steal and you don't know who you stole from, you don't know who to pay back. So Balei Musa and people would have a minig of doing things, public things. They would pay for park benches or other things which will help. Just like I don't know who it was, I'm going to try to make up for it. Maybe I'll get that person, but at least I'll be helping other people that I otherwise wouldn't have met. That week I was going to Hertz to speak for Chabad, Thursday, Chai Shvat. I got on the plane, and now comes the success. I was determined. I was sitting there were 3 seats. There was an empty between us, and he was by the window, I was by the aisle. I made a friendly conversation with this guy, and then after about 15, 20 minutes, I said, "Efshar taniach tefillin?" He said, "Mucha yoter," later. And I just talked with him, pitter-patter. Then about a half hour later, I told him, "Would I taniach tefillin?" So he said, "Mucha yoter," later. So I said, "It's getting dark, it's getting towards the Shkia." So he put on the tefillin. It turns out, I'm telling you his definition. He's a secular Israeli, married to a secular Israeli woman, living in London. He's not married api halacha. He's married civil marriage. I asked him, "Do you ever go to synagogue?" He says he never goes. But in the course of the conversation, we talked. We're very friendly. He speaks perfect English. He's working for a security company, and so his wife is working for another company, similar type of work. In the course of the conversation, he told me something. He says, like it says in the Sedra this week. So I said to him, "What do you know about the Sedra? You never walk into a shul." He says, I get online. He says, I have a spiritual streak in me. And I check it online. So I said to him, a guy with your spiritual streak, you should own your own prayer tefillin. And I'm going to give you a prayer tefillin. And he said, okay. And we exchanged contact details. I went there to Israel for 3-4 days. He went also for a few days. And then when we were back, so it's a week and a day later, Friday. I call him every Friday since then. Even when I'm here, he called me. I put him in touch with the shaliach for the Israelis in Golders Green. And he got the tefillin and he paid for it himself. About $650. And I asked him on the phone, I said, "Is your wife on board?" He said, "She's very secular." He said, "She's not on board, but she's supportive that I wear tefillin and that I go to Beit Knesset." He started going to shul, a little bit anyway. I said, "That's called on board." I said, at that stage, that's called on board. I said, "Tell me, did you thank her like you should?" He said, I do. He said, "But I get the point." He says, "I have to be more." Then, yes, I met them. We went out together once or twice. I arranged them for Pesach, Seder, different kinds of things. The Kitzur Maisa is, you wouldn't know this. Whatever I tell you about the background, I put him in touch with a son of ours who is a rabbi at the United Synagogue with his wife, and they're getting married in Yetzer Hashem. I told them I want them to get married before Chabad Shvat for the year. Now, I tell you this story. That's the story after the stands now, and he's been on trips to Riga, he's been to Vegas, he's been to Orlando. Each place, I got in touch with the shaliach to tell him, and I got in touch with him, and he was in touch. He sends me selfies from everywhere, wherever he is, and we're all excited, and we talk every week, well, like you did it. Very, very close. We talk and have a connection, and with her as well. She's coming along very, very well. Why do I tell you the story? I'm telling you the story because I met about 50 of this guy in the last year, but he's the only one I can tell you about. I'm telling you about me and about you and about all of us. Not with everyone can you do everything that you want to do. But the koiches that there is today, the Rebbe changed the whole landscape. The potential in the world today is very, very different. It's so much closer to what we're aiming for. And the danger is, on a certain level, the success. Not appreciating how much we have to do because we have an unlimited goal. And that means to reach many more people, and it means reaching many, many other levels within our own self, in our own family, and in our own personal neshama. To not be satisfied, to say I'm happy with everything, but I want more. Always looking what I can do more. That's what we saw from the Rebbe. An urgency, a growth mindset, a positive outlook, 100%. And saying that you'll get there, and it's happening. You see around the whole world that it's happening. But not to be satisfied from where we are. To think of how many more opportunities we could have had. This kalim, people are ready. People have seen the collapse of all different alternatives. And it's up to us to be inspired by learning, to be inspiring by mivtzoyim and be mekar of them, by going deeper into our own self, by having a mashpia, all these type of things. It's getting late. So let me tell one more story. One more story. Can I tell you a story? This is a great one. What?
Take a few questions afterwards.
Pardon?
Take a few questions.
Any questions? Say it loud.
After the story. I'll make an answer first.
The what?
I'll make an answer before that.
How make it?
So first tell your story.
What?
Tell your story.
I'll tell the story. Okay. Yeah, if anyone wants to ask questions, when it comes to questions, I want to tell you a story. You might have heard it before. I heard it about 45 years ago from my father-in-law, Mr. Zalman Jaffe, Olav Shalom. And it's just a recent year, most recent years, that I suddenly realized a depth in that story. Now, he had a special relationship with the Rebbe. For years, for decades, he would write a letter every single week. He told me, I write every week 2 sides, because then I can put it in and it pays the minimum amount of the stamp to send it to New York. And I said, what happens if a lot of things happen that week? He said, I condense it and put it all into 2 sides. I said, what if nothing happened that week? He said, I stretch it out over 2 sides. He was a character. That was the kind of person he was. And one time he got a phone call. The first time he was there for Simchas Torah, about a week later, 2 weeks later, he gets a phone call from the Rebbe's secretary why he didn't write his impression of being by the Rebbe the first time Simchas Torah. That wasn't why he didn't write. So he said, I wrote. Looks like the letter got lost. So he asked the Rebbe for permission, and the Rebbetzin for permission, to send all his letters to the Rebbe's house on President Street. And he got the permission, and he used to speak every single week. On Friday, on Friday he would speak to the Rebbetzin. He'd write the letter on Friday, and it used to arrive on Wednesday. The Rebbetzin told him, your letters come on Wednesday, and we always read it. She said, we always read it. And but this was earlier. This was the late 60s, I think, with the story I'm going to tell you. And he used to get answers. He was in New York. It would be a hot hail year with thousands and thousands of visitors. And he'd write in daily, and virtually every time he got an answer from the Rebbe. So one time, in the late 60s, he was in Yechidus, and he thanked the Rebbe for inviting him to be one of the minyan that had the meals in the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked him, how did you enjoy the davening here? And he says, I was a little bit disappointed because in Manchester, that's where he lived, in Manchester, England. In Manchester, we sing Ho'aderes V'Emunah every single Shabbos. And over here, they don't sing it every week. See, the Seder in those days was, the Rebbe stood by his tender, and when it came, there's a mun, if the Rebbe went like this, just picked up a hand, then they would sing. Same with whoever came. And if not, they didn't sing. So the Rebbe said to him, you should sing it over here as well. This was maybe a Thursday night. Came Shabbos, they're going to davening, and the Chazan says, "No, you sing lachem b'chol basar, ki lo'elam chazdoi, oy du l'kel hashemayim, ki lo'elam chazdoi." And the Rebbe didn't budge. But the Rebbe told him he's got to sing. And he had a very, very loud voice and a lot of guts. And he screams out, "Oh, it's very, very loud." And the whole shul was scandalized. And they would scream at him, but they couldn't scream because the Rebbe was there in the corner. So everyone was standing, waving hands at him in the garbage, telling him, he should be quiet. Other people are telling me crazy. Everything was in sign language, but everyone was jumping up and down, and he sang solo through the entire Haderes V'Emunah. And the next day, he went back to England. Fast forward, 1 year later, the next year, he was coming, and he was afraid of that same experience. Very uncomfortable. Maybe it didn't seem so to everybody who looked at it. And he wrote to the Rebbe and said, "You told me to sing at Eretz Emunah last year. Was that just for then? Or is that permanent?" He wrote that on the plane or before he went. He got to New York this time. It was not the end of his visit. Beginning of his visit, he gave this into the Rebbe, and he got no reply. Came Shabbos, and the Chazan says, "No, you say lachem l'chol basar, ki lo'elam chazdoi, hoidu l'kel hashemayim, ki lo'elam chazdoi." And the Rebbe didn't budge. He figured the Rebbe didn't take away that instruction from me. So he belted out. He sang it again. It went, and people said, "The Meshuggah is don't know Hamol." And everybody was again, waving the hands and giving sign language. He should be quiet. And he sang through the whole Haderes V'Emunah. But this time, with the beginning of his visit, and he went after that into Yechidus. So he was in Yechidus with the Rebbe, and he said to the Rebbe, "Chabad taina, I have a complaint." And the Rebbe said, "Complaint? What kind of complaint?" He said, "You told me to sing Haderes V'Emunah." I did. He said, "One lift of one finger of your hand would have saved me all this flack everyone think I'm a Meshugah." He told the Rebbe that everyone was telling him to stop. "And you could have saved me all of that bother, so that's my taina." So the way my father-in-law told the story, he said, the Rebbe said with a twinkle in his eye, he says, "An avla was hier gefragt. You were wrong to even ask the question. I told you what to do. And you did it. Good for you." End of the story. Makes no difference what everybody else said. That's the story. But it's not the story. Because my father-in-law realized that the real thank you goes to the Chazan. The Chazan didn't have to scream at him or wave his hand or his fist or anything else. The Chazan could have done one simple thing, and that is to start Baruch She'omah. The Chazan could have said, "Baruch She'omah B'Yolam," and he'd be standing there singing, and he'd be up to Oz Yoshia by the time he finished his song. So he went over to the Chazan, and he says, "I want to give you a very big Yosher Koyach for saving me, because you could have done nothing." So the Chazan said, I couldn't start Baruch Shama. He said, why not? He said, we never start Baruch Shama until the Rebbe picks up his tzitzis. And the Rebbe hadn't picked up his tzitzis. That's the story. Now, the last few years, I suddenly realized that story is a paradigm of Gimel Tammuz. Every one of us knows what we should, or what we could, or what it would be right for us to do. And it doesn't make all the sideshows and the white noise and the distractions that in life are not relevant. I know what the Rebbe wants me to do. And the fact that he's not waving his hand or banging on the stender or picking up the finger, but really, he's doing something. You didn't notice it. He didn't pick up his tzitzis. The Rebbe was actually supporting in the Rebbe way. And that's what's happening today as well. You do it, there is the help, the support, the koyach, which is given to us from the Rebbe, and which we can tap into that reservoir, and we can access it with our own, even small steps, and certainly little medium steps towards his kashrus to the Rebbe. Good job.
We will take a few questions before we do the next part. The night is still young, and it wasn't an easy day to do it. We have no employees in the building, period. But it's an easy day because something else is happening in the technical world. A lot of people are not working tomorrow, so we can continue Farbrengen through the night. I just want to say a few quick things. Number one, I want to mention, and I want to get the chalukah. I want to thank, this is a project also of jointly the other shuls in the neighborhood, myself, Rabbi Markowitz, and then from free Rabbi Levi Notik, and Rabbi Hertz and Rabbi Baruch Beis Menachem. And the idea is to bring programs and events in the situation of Torah for the community. And with Hashem, we should give them a nachas ruach and have the Rebbe with us together. It's, I do want to thank, even though there was no charge for the event, we want to make it accessible to everybody. If you want, you can start it. Everyone can, if you want to. Outside there's a plate outside. But I want to thank specifically the Weissman family for sponsoring. Including Mrs. Weissman, who physically also brought some food personally shopping for Farbrengen. I do want to thank the Zohar for the video. I want to acknowledge that one of the heroes, Hey Teves, they're not Erev Hey Teves now, if the Rebbe is besides Farbrengen is to buy Svarim. And I do want to mention Congregation Labor, our own, who also sells Svarim. That's a local, but I encourage everyone to buy Svarim, Hey Teves. This is a clear hero for the Rebbe to buy them and also learn them. I just want to say a very important thing, and that is, we all want to connect to coming out Yud Shvat. Yud Shvat is a day that us Chassidim want to connect and feel with part of the Rebbe. Recently, I mentioned this before, someone was sitting by me, I gave a Vatayra, and said, I was not by the Rebbe, and this is my Vatayra. And I said, if you allow me, I want to object, I disagree with the Vatayra. She says, why? I hope you're not insulted, but my disagreement was, you are by the Rebbe. If you learn the Rebbe's Torah, and if you learn it and live with it, I believe that you're by the Rebbe. Each and every one of us can be by the Rebbe and be Yud Shvat and be part of the Rebbe. There's a worldwide chalukah by an organization called R Zohar Harari. Different communities around the world have taken on, it's a continuation of the project we had, which we were one of the catalysts in Chicago. Gimel Tammuz, the learning that time, and we just recently learned again, Chanav Kislev, and Chayel. There's a worldwide project of dividing the entire Torah of the Rebbe. So here in Chicago, we took the year Tavshin Yud Beis, which is a special year. I just want to say every year is special. I know personally the Maimon L'Sim Shekei, that year, many Chassidim, there was many Geluyim, great revelations. In fact, my children, we put together the entire Yud Beis in spots. We wanted to divide it out tonight. It's not a lot. Everyone should take one chelek. It's a few pages to learn Chavrusa. There's a list where Markowitz will actually sign it, so put your name down of what you're taking. You actually join the entire world of Chassidim, entire world of Klal Yisrael, learning the Rebbe's Mamorim, Sichas, and Igrus Chaydish. There's a choice in this pile. You have a maimah, both men and women. You can take a sicha, a maimah, or a few letters. So I encourage everyone tonight, let's tonight at least take on 1 year Tavshin Yud Beis. I just want to say after a few questions on Ma'ariv, following that will be Farbrengen. I just ask that what we did in one of the Hamish Islands across the room, but I ask the children let the adults sit down first and just show respect. And with Rabbi should help us again, as we do the proper achonis, as Rabbi Lew mentioned, we have Hey Teves, which is actually not the Shvat, but Hey Teves being the Rebbe together. Again, want to give a special thank you to Rabbi Lew. It's not easy to make these trips and travel, but it's actually pashut because when Chassidim are asking for some inspiration and guidance, Rabbi Lew is a real chassid, is always there, never says no, and we pashut in Chicago. We want to give a special thank you.